Oh, Fig fam, we're back. Figs and coffee. It's fall. I haven't talked to you guys in a hot minute, and I was doing a lot of behind the scenes work. I've been having a lot of events. Thank you to everyone who came out to Figtoberfest down in Texas. Destin, thank you for having me. Thank you for everybody down there showing me around and getting to meet fellow fig growers. It's a rare opportunity. I've also had a chance to meet and connect with a lot of you this fall here in the North Carolina area. But I've had a few podcasts, I've had a few presentations, and I came back to fall at the fig nursery. And what does fall mean for figs? It does mean some defoliation. It does mean some second rounds of growth. It does mean some fruit still, but it also means dormancy. And for different fig varieties, when we come out to the sun, it's about feeling out how they want to grow during October. And for me here in Wilmington, North Carolina, zone 8B, right on the coast, it means I'm right on the cusp of getting a second main crop growth, which is what this Peter's honey is trying to do right here, or going into dormancy and staying dormant, perhaps like this Smith or like this LSU Tiger that is slowly defoliating. Now, we do have fig rust here in the humid southeast. I do not like fig rust. I am investing a lot of time for next year into preventing it as much as I can and kind of get into a space where I don't have to worry about it as much. And then there is an element of accepting it. You know, when I was in Texas, fig rust is just part of the matrix of growing figs there. But still getting ripe figs, guys. Oh, mmm, Genovese Nero AF. So we're at these crossroads here in the fall. So I'm going to put the camera on the tripod and I'm going to go through some examples of what your figs might be doing this time of year, whether you're up in the Northeast, whether you're down in the South, or somewhere in the middle, like me here in Wilmington, North Carolina, where you can have a little bit of everything. You could have ripening fruit, or you could have dormancy, or you can have second rounds of growth. All possible with mixed weather patterns and different fig varieties here in the Southeast. So here in Wilmington, North Carolina, middle of October, we've had an unseasonably cool fall. It doesn't mean it was cold. We live in a warmer fall climate, the hot and humid Southeast, but it's been cooler. And so despite growth still happening on some of my fig trees, some of the more sensitive varieties are slowing down. And this Peter's honey during the last bit of summer when it was still hot put out a bunch of new growth, and because it was a mature tree, put out a bunch of new figs. The big piece of fall that we have to manage is we are getting less sunlight and temperatures are cooling down. And sunlight and warmth are both needed for the ripening of figs. So when I see a lot of trees like this, unless we have a really warm late fall, these probably won't ripen in fruit. I'm not worried about pulling the fruit off quite yet, letting it focus on growth, because growth also requires heat and sunlight. And I care a lot about the growth of the fig trees slowing down at this time too, because I want the new growth to lignify for the winter time. Lignification is, and let's zoom in real quick, is the hardening off of the new branch growth. You see how this is still green? I really want it to get down to this hardened wood brown. If you follow it down, I really want it to get down to this hardened up brown wood color, where we have that nice establishment of bark for healthy sap flow, and it can handle freezing, temps, and dormancy. If we were to have an early freeze, all this new growth would be susceptible to frost damage, freeze damage, and eventually die off the tree, or stress the tree enough that that would die back even further than we would have wanted. So what I'm hopeful for, and I'm letting the fruit stay on because I don't want it to keep focusing on growth, is I want it to slow down with the cooler temperatures and lignify with what remaining sunlight I have left. Later ripening figs like my Italian 258, my Col de Dame Blanc, my Col de Dame Noir, they're ripening right now. And all this is new growth from the summer, and that's starting to ripen at the end of all of these branches. And if you look, all that wood is starting to lignify on all these terminal branches and buds, and that is awesome. So for me, this is an ideal situation. Again, this is one of my favorite prune trees. I am going to harvest cuttings, but I'm just going to harvest them from the existing branches and let them branch out, because I, with my rule of threes, have had our 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 all the way up. Remember, 3 scaffolding, 3 secondary, 3 tertiary. And from there, you're kind of set. But in the fall, now that's become a mature tree, I'm letting it run its course. And it helps a lot that it's a later ripening variety, because it's starting to ripen fruits here in September and October. Unless we have like a freak growth in November, it's not going to be pushing out a lot of new growth. A great thing about fig trees too is that they can ripen their figs if the leaves start falling off. Now, since we have fig rust, it did put out some new fig growth, and there's still some fig rust on here, but with green figs in the cells here, you can still photosynthesize with the cells on the figs themselves. Also, with defoliation, it also incentivizes the fig tree to ripen the fruit as well, which is pretty cool. So 2 different stages of an early ripening fig and a late ripening fig here in Wilmington, North Carolina, zone 8B. This tree has ripened earlier for me before, and for people growing up north, it'll ripen even earlier if grown in a container. If you look at something like my Col de Dame Blanc, it actually ripened its fruit and started to defoliate even more with this huge cold front. I think we got down to like the low 40s, and it started to enter dormancy almost. I also, in an effort to encourage dormancy, removed leaves from the tree and to help it slow down its growth. I am seeing with some warmer, now that we're rebounding with some warmer temperatures again, that buds are swelling and it's pushing out some new growth, but not a very rapid pace. Again, Col de Dames need a lot of heat and a lot of sun, and this is kind of my threshold. You could probably grow them a little further north, or maybe zone 8A in the ground, but they just like a lot more heat. And they like a lot more hang time. They like a lot more time with fruit set before ripening than any other fig variety that I've worked with. But they're fantastic figs, which is why I grow them. I see a lot of cutting availability here. I was chatting with ProFig a few months back during the middle of the season on our podcast, The Garden Party. If you haven't listened to that, it's a great time to just hang out and listen to a bunch of people talk about what's growing on in their gardens that are content creators. We get to compare seasonal differences, but Col de Dames, once established, they do really well with heavy pruning. So you'll see a lot of cuttings for sale this winter from my Col de Dames now that they're established. Circling back though, you can force dormancy too if you see a lot of their leaves turning yellow. If you live in a nice, beautiful place that doesn't have fig rust, figs, when they go dormant, turn this beautiful yellow as they fall. And I love watching a fall fig tree settle in for the winter time. If you live in warmer climates, sometimes they just turn brown, and that's okay. But I also have fig rust here that kind of aids in the dormancy process. But I don't see for the foreseeable future a lot of growth happening. In fact, the buds that are swelling now are really minimal. And I encouraged going into dormancy after I harvested all the fruit. That being said, I did it in accordance with less heat and less sunlight. If you do that in a really warm place like Southern California, you might see my next example. This Italian 258. Because it's in a container, I actually harvested the figs earlier, and it's basically the same as Genovese and Nero AF. But because it was in a container, it woke up a little earlier. I think I had to do the fig shuffle with it. It put out a bunch of new growth, and I harvested the figs earlier in the year because it woke up earlier. So that whole timeline was shifted forward because I cared for it in a greenhouse, because it woke up early and I was able to do a fig shuffle, which means taking them in and out of a warm place in the springtime when the spring weather gets inadvertently cold or abnormally cold, just to protect it and continue its growth. I harvested a lot of figs from this earlier in the year, the end of August, and it has decided to keep growing despite me pulling off all the old growth leaves. And so now you can see that it has a whole new canopy of growth. Because I harvested all the fruit earlier, because I removed the leaves that I thought were falling off on their own, it actually encouraged it to put out and flush out new growth because I did it too early in the season. So with all these nice warm temps and sunlight, because this is one of the sunnier spots of my yard over here in my in-ground fig orchard, it decided to put out new growth. Now I'm concerned because I have, let's see, it's October 20th. I have about a month and a half before my first freeze, and I don't know if that's enough time to get my branches to lignify by then. So if it does go dormant or I force dormancy on it, I may have to prune it back and see if I can propagate some of those cuttings with the green growth on them. That's not the best way to go about it. I really want to see that lignification. And unfortunately, because that happened too early, I may not see that. The caveat is that it's a younger tree, it's not quite as established, and it's in a container. So a more established tree will get more familiarized with the climate that it lives in. So that's the opposite of something that maybe ripens earlier in the year that is pushing out another set of growth. Not to take away from, like this Figo Preto, figs that are still ripening this time of year with all kinds of new growth that had happened throughout this summertime. They've had a long enough fruit set and now they're starting to ripen. My Figo Preto always ripens this time of year. It does well actually when it defoliates, and I am actually not worried about those figs ripening because they set earlier in the year and they just take longer time to decide to ripen. Unlike this newer tree, Regatta de Salento, where it's still young, a lot of these figs that it put out and it clustered at the end here are small, and they're probably not going to grow much larger than that. I can in fact take these off, but I really don't want to because I don't want to encourage it to grow too much more, because we are settling into less light and less heat of fall. But these figs probably won't ripen for me because they grew and set too late in the year. So despite seeing a lot of unripe figs on my trees, some have been setting on the tree longer than others. And that's why you see with that Figo Preto, it's starting to ripen now, because it had been set on the tree for months, where these are only a few weeks old because they get to a terminal size. And then when they're ready after a certain amount of fruit set, then they will swell and ripen for you. So in the summertime or the times you've grown your fig, you kind of have to get a feel and a sense for what that fig is going to do. Because you have your early varieties like your Celestes, your Hardy Chicagos. And Hardy Chicagos are really ever-bearing, kind of like the Peter's Honey, which is also early, where they'll flush out a second set of growth. Early enough in the season, you might get a second main crop if you live in warmer climates, or they will slow down after they're ripening in earlier fall in a northern climate. That's why it's really helpful if you live in a colder growing region to grow earlier ripening varieties in the ground, or if you have a later ripening variety to grow in a container like Italian 258, where it will ripen earlier for you, or you have more control over its environment in case it wakes up earlier in the spring. Because where I am in Wilmington, North Carolina, I'm at the confluence of like true subtropical southern weather and mid-Atlantic weather that has more of a standard 4 seasons. So I actually defoliated this one and it was just a hair too late. It decided that it got some sunlight and flushed out some new growth. And it's even growing some suckers down here out from the base. So I have to be very cautious with this over the next few months because I'm worried that this won't lignify. But I could harvest these suckers as their own trees. If you see suckers growing like this, you generally want to wait till they lignify, but these are later in the year, so I'm going to give it my all to try to grow these suckers from what I got. Otherwise, I'm going to lose them anyway. If you're waiting on fruit to ripen in the fall, and I know Ross talks about hang time, let me make sure you guys can see this. Okay, good. This is my Nurucciolo d'Elba, and it takes a long time for this fig to ripen in cooler weather. Because you have less heat and less sunlight, even if it's swelling, getting ready to ripen, it just takes more time on the tree in cooler weather. And sometimes the figs don't taste as good. There are certain varieties that do better in cooler weather. The white Genoa that I have here does great in fall, cooler weather. I've seen it ripen like in the high 30s with like a flurry outside, and I couldn't believe it was still ripening fruit then. This Nurucciolo d'Elba takes a long time on the tree, and dark figs tend to do that. So you really have to wait till it's nice and soft, which it's doing right now. And I'll zoom in for you. But you can see this one's starting to change color now, and this is over the course of days, plural. And then once it actually gets dark, it's still firm, and it actually takes 5 or so days to get nice and ripe in this cooler climate where we're only hitting maybe 70 in the day and getting even down into the 40s at night, which is abnormally cold for this time of year. In fact, here in Wilmington, North Carolina, we can still go to the beach through October and the water stays above 70 on the ocean, and we have some nice sunny days in the 80s. So it's still beach weather on the weekends. So we've been abnormally cold, so these fruits on my fig trees are not ripening as fast. Zooming back out, I have two more examples I want to show you guys for the people that are getting excited for fall, exciting for fig propagation. And this is actually going to result in a giveaway, is that I had fig trees that looked like they were done producing. Maybe they had fig rust and all their figs ripened and they weren't doing anything, and I assumed they were going to go into a dormancy mode. But with this sudden fluctuation of hot and cold, they actually woke back up and are pushing out new growth. And that's a big mistake on my part, because I am worried that when fall comes, that pruning with that new growth, they are not going to recover well enough and they're going to die back. All right, this is my white Madeira #1. And as you can see, I pruned it way back. Yes, the sap was still flowing. I cut all the prunes back at 45-degree angles. It had shown me all these signs that it was done growing, but because we still have the southeast where we have a little bit of volatile, capricious weather where we go through troughs of cold and warm heat, troughs of cold and spikes of heat, we end up waking up some of the fig trees. So the bonus is it's actually pushing out new terminal buds. The benefit is it's pushing out new buds that I hope will lignify in time for dormancy this year. But it's waking up again, and I'm worried that if I get a lot of growth, that it can actually damage the tree more when it goes into actual winter dormancy. So if you are pruning your tree too early and you see this happening, you're just putting your tree at risk for not recovering properly. I happen to do the same thing with my Companiere fig. This was entering its second year. It's getting pretty well established, but it had grown about 6 feet. It's an early ripening variety, but it hasn't pushed out new growth. And I'm hoping that it'll stay dormant for me for the rest of the foreseeable fall. I can actually remove this because it was holding up just a thin branch. You can see how much a fig tree grows over the course of the year. And in the fall, when you have good lignification, when you're ready to go into dormancy mode and prune your fig tree back, this is what a good fig tree can look like, a stick in the ground. But let me assure you that I see nodes all over this 1-year-old growth and 2-year-old growth. And that can turn into a new, beautiful fig tree that I can start pruning with that rule of threes. But this is a win where the sap hasn't really, it's not flowing as much. If I do a score of the bark with my fingernail, I can see some sap flow, but it's not pouring out. It's getting ready for wintertime. So again, you're going to have varying figs at varying stages of dormancy, whether I do it too soon, whether I do it right at the right time, or unfortunately trying to do it too late with new growth, new figs, and maybe getting some dieback. So it's all an enjoyable experiment. I'm glad I get to experiment it for you guys and see what the different stages can be. And a beautiful thing is, at the end of the day, a 3-year-old fig tree is a resilient fruit tree. It'll recover for you. My goal is those first 3 years for you guys to get a fig tree in the ground growing and giving you fruit, because once established, they are strong, resilient trees, especially if you live in zone 7B and below. 7A even, and if you're in the 6s with some proper winter care, they're great plants to grow. When I was in Texas, I hit 2,000 subscribers, and I just want to say thanks to all of you joining me on this fig nursery journey, this food forest journey, and I want to do a giveaway. So I'm gonna have 2 cuttings of the white Madeira, #1 to give away, that are in my fridge right now. They're wrapped in saran wrap, nice and tight in my crisper drawer. And I'm gonna be giving 2 cuttings of the Companiere fig away. Yes, the sap was still flowing when I pulled them, but I soaked them, rinsed them off, and I put them in the drawer for dormancy. They should root quite nicely for you. Just comment in the comment section. I think I'll just do 1 comment. If you're the winner, I'll message back on your comment. Just let me know in the comments that you would like a cutting of either of these. Just enter 1 time. If you already have both of these, I'd like to see your support and hear how you're doing with your fall gardening and your fall fig tree growing, and where you guys are at. But if this was helpful to you, please like the video, please subscribe, reach out with questions, and I look forward to handing out the 2 Companiere cuttings and the 2 white Madeira cuttings that I have waiting for a new home. So thank you guys so much, and make sure you're liked and subscribed, and hit me up with questions. Until next time, take care, Fig Fam.